Yeah, so I have spent the last week trying to, well, building my website, rebuilding, rebranding completely, trying to take an ecological approach to building the website and discussing business from an ecological approach, which was challenging in
Yes.
many ways because one of the things we were just talking about is the Neurodiverse Entrepreneur Summit, and how they were talking about throwing out the rules and things like that. That it almost seems to be like a shortcut sentence to the ecological approach, or could be a shortcut sentence to the ecological approach, but it rarely is. It's like, let me toss out all these rules and give you a set of new ones.
Yeah. Yeah. As I was saying, I went to a conference. I say a conference. I went to a sort of like a meetup thing in London, and there were mainly basketball coaches there, but there was a cricket coach there, and then another. I say another academic. I'm more an academic than a coach at the moment, so I would call myself an independent researcher or academic rather than practitioner, rather than coach. At the moment, I'm working on it.
Huh.
I am technically coaching, but the I asked everyone at the end because they spoke about it as the CLA. They said, "Oh, it's the constraints-led approach. It's the constraints-led approach. It's the CLA," and I didn't like that, and I still don't like that because differential learning isn't CLA, but
Mm.
differential learning is what they were talking about sometimes with the session design,
Mm.
and I'm like, okay, so you got the CLA and differential learning that falls under the ecological approach. And they're like, yeah, yeah, but it's not quite ecological. I'm like, no, it is. Your framework, your philosophy, the way that you make the decisions or the way that you justify the decisions that you're making is through an ecological approach rather than approach from cognitive psychology. And it's similar with the rules is, oh yeah, toss out the rules. Yeah, but it's the intention of the new whatever it is that you're going to do after that. And if your new rules are other rules, you're still using the same framework, the same philosophy. There's no, to use a term that Julius mentioned in our previous conversation, there's no paradigm shift there. You're
Mm.
just reframing old ways,
Yeah.
which isn't helpful.
And it was something that I was really cautious of as I was rebuilding my website, because I was like, how can I, one, market this to people, which obviously adds a bunch of constraints and means I have to think, and means it is more efficient for me to use their language versus my language, because obviously all the lovely stuff, whilst also still keeping the approach there. And what I learnt quite heavily, because we had a conversation, I can't remember whether it was in the podcast or after the podcast, around practice design.
Mhm.
And so I've lent quite hard into practice design, because that is basically what I'm doing, as I am coaching people in their practice design, whether it's their practice design to get this or do that or do this thing or do that thing. It's around developing a practice design. Well, it's still, that word is developing is not, I'm still trying to figure out the right word because it's not quite right, but it is about,
Why not?
like, something about it's not quite, because they have a practice design. They're just not aware of their practice design. They're not attuned to what they already have, because often they have a practice design, they just aren't confident in it, and everything else is kind of getting in the way.
So what is practice design to you?
So practice design is the things you do to get the things you want to do done. That's what it is.
Behavior.
Yeah, behave. Oh, well, yeah, behavior. That's a nicer behavior. Yeah, it's behavior.
Yeah, this is one of those things that if you look too deeply into the meaning of words, we can get very tied up onto the nuances. But for me,
Yes.
practice design is behavior. Who
Yeah.
doesn't have behavior? The dead. Who are you not
Yeah.
working with? So
Yeah.
everyone has practice design. So when you say they often have, I would rephrase that and say, well, everyone has a practice design
Yeah.
because
It's about
everyone
whether the
behaves.
practice design matches the behaviors they want to
I wouldn't say
inhabit.
match
What would it be?
because match suggests that there's a
Yes,
fit.
there's a fit. That's true. The
So
behavior.
a practice design includes the environment because
Yeah.
behavior is organism environment relationship. So
Yeah.
practice design over instruction. Instruction typically removes the environment from the behaviors that you're looking to emerge from the learner. So for
Yeah.
me, it would be a practice design that's more efficient in achieving whatever goal you want to
Yeah.
hit with the
Yeah.
behavior.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. It is about the what they want to achieve, how they want to achieve it, what they want to be doing, why they want to be doing it. It's all the philosophy of practice, which is really fun to try and summarize in a very short FAQ
That's
on
easy.
my
Just use
services
some
page.
complex words.
Yeah, I was quite happy with how it went in the end because I was like, all right, this isn't too bad. And when I was talking to my friend as we were building this together, I was like, how can I? I was like, this is a piece of content. This is a massive discussing a philosophy of practice, which is basically part of the practice design. Is it the practice design? Is the philosophy of practice the practice? Because it's part of the philosophy of practice, but it isn't. That's the bit that I got kind of like, but am I diving into nuance again? Because it sort of is, but also it's only part of it. Because you've obviously got the values and the things you hold, and you've got your lexicon, those kind of pieces, and the things that you do and why you do them.
Systems theory.
Yeah,
Like yes, it is. Like they are one in the same, but it depends on the scale at which you're measuring. And this is where, for marketing, what scale are you measuring? What scale of complexity are you looking to introduce with the marketing? Obviously, you wouldn't want to go too narrow because
yeah,
now you're focused on instructions and the right way. So you're
yeah.
stepping
It
back
was,
and it's working out how far to step back.
yeah. That was the bit that I really struggled with. It's like how far, because I went very fine at first as we were discussing, and then I had to keep moving back a little bit more and a little bit more. It emerged over time of like just the what felt good and effective at the time, and it's going to be good to see how it's received
Mhm.
because I'm going to have a lot of eyes on my site, which is so basically I don't have a large audience.
I
I
haven't
have
seen your site yet.
yeah, I will happily send it to you.
I was going to say
uh,
maybe I could have a look after the call and we can have a discussion about it.
yeah, I'd be happy to do that. It'd be great fun. That's kind of what I'm hoping. Yeah, it was interesting because I was talking from an ecological perspective and the person on the other side was not. They're starting to understand the approach to their at their point.
It's
And so
developing.
it's interesting to hear their interpretation of what I'm saying. And I'm like, oh, that's a good point. And oh, that's a good point. And that's a good point. They're kind of where I was because I sort of have been doing something like this for a while, but I didn't really know I was doing it and I wasn't confident. So I kept flipping back.
So I'm thinking about a part of the conversation I had with Jeff at the beginning of last week. And Jeff said before he got into ecological psychology through all the lectures at university, he had this feeling that we
Mm,
were doing stuff. And
mm,
there were opportunities to do things, but he didn't have a
mm.
word or a way to explain it.
Yes.
And it was just like,
Yes.
this felt right. This feels right, but there's no
Yes.
explanation for this. And then he
Yes.
found affordances and all of the rest of
Yeah.
the things that we talk about in the ecological approach. And you're like, yes, these are the words I wanted.
Yeah, and that's exact that like for years, as I said in the article, kind of put into the article, was like I've always wanted to I can do things. And often, especially in the traditional approach, we're not able to do things. We can't do things because of XYZ, because we haven't been provided instructions, because we haven't been told what to do, because XY we have to be told what to do to be able to do things. And I've always felt that sucked.
Internal brain-based problems. Oh no, that's just natural. You just can't naturally do that. Sorry.
I'm like,
Um,
yeah, but well, I couldn't always naturally do that. But well, then why can I naturally do that now?
uh, yeah.
Uh. So I always had that, and that was throughout my business experience. It's just things as I was watching behind the scenes and watching business owners run their businesses as because I was the tech person and the implementer and all of that side of things. Just watching what successful people did. And by successful, I'm defining it by they're making money in their business because that's what a successful business is. They make
Mhm.
enough money to do the things they want to do. Yay. And so that was like, oh, interesting. So you're that's how do you decide what you're doing? They're just like, I don't know, I just do it. I'm like, interesting. So I just get on with it. I'm like, interesting.
But that doesn't help me. I
But
can't
that
follow
doesn't,
instruction.
yeah. And it was just like, yeah, but well, who told you? Oh, no one. I just kind of just figured it out as I was going along. And I'm
So
like, interesting.
this
So that either way, that that's how I felt when I started my teaching. I taught guitar and did all of my other businesses, all of the things that I've done, and all of the things I can just do. Because as I've said previously, I have been constantly criticized by my friends and family, because I go, we'll just do it. But it's
Mhm.
not from a case of like, because it is that simple, but it's obviously not that simple. Because it's like when they ask how I do, and what, yeah,
Scales,
it's the factor
scales.
we're looking at. Yeah, it's the scale you're looking at. And they ask, because I'm looking at it from like I suppose I'm looking at it from quite a wide, it's like, well, it just happens. I just do it because I want to do it, so I'll do it.
This makes me think of the conversation that I had with the cricket coach at the conference a couple of days ago. Is that he was suggesting that when we have coaches and teachers, they're not teaching, or they shouldn't be teaching. They should be helping the individual figure it out on their own. So the learner, the expertise that they're developing, that's what's getting the solution. Like the coach doesn't tell the person, okay, now do this thing, and then the person can do the thing. The person has to actually do the thing to find the solution. Like you can't tell someone, okay, just if I was to tell you, okay, just move your hips backwards and your head forwards and then rotate your feet round, now you can do a somersault. No, you have to actually do the thing. So when it comes to the focus of, oh, just do it, us as individuals that have knowledge about and knowledge of the skill can say, oh, just do it
Mm,
because we've got knowledge of the skill. Those that haven't just done it don't have that knowledge because they haven't done it. They need to have done it to some extent for them to develop. And that's where, again, scale of measurement, you're going to change wherever you put it. But if you haven't started some big influential movements, behaviors towards achieving the goal of doing the skill, then you're not going to develop very quickly. You're not going to develop how to write unless you write. You're not going to develop how to build a business unless you build a business. Will you
mm.
fail? Yes, but that's learning. That's how you develop those skills. That's how you start. You start by starting. It sounds obvious, but
Yeah, and it was interesting as I was talking to the person who's Claire, they're running the whole thing, and I was talking about what I'm doing, and and their reaction was, "Oh, yeah, it seems so simple." I'm like, "Yeah,
it is.
it is," except all of the other stuff that we've been told and we've been taught
Yep.
states the exact opposite to this.
So a question for you then. I imagine on your website in somewhere there is either explicitly or implicitly mentioned education of attention and education of intention, because that's what happens when you're learning and developing experience and developing expertise for calibrating all of the knowledge.
Yeah.
Um, how how are you going to discuss with those individuals that are neurodiverse these ideas? Because as we've discussed previously, the term neurodiverse and the labels, the categories, the language that's used from traditional approaches is somewhat contradictory with the ecological approach. So, are you going to tackle language, or are you going to follow with their language? And like, I guess where is your starting mark? What's your
So my starting mark is to meet them where they are. So I will
Mhm.
use the language and the terminology because language is communication and I'm communicating. So that's the place where, because as I think we've discussed recently, I think when I went, well, both of us had this experience when we first started exploring, but I'll just talk about mine. Like I'm going to get rid of neurodiverse and talking about the brain and talking about memory and talk about these things because they're just wrong and everything. But then that's almost kind of exactly the opposite point of what the ecological approach is, where there isn't really wrong. It's just depending on the environment that I'm in. And
could
so
be
I've
very,
kind of,
very ineffective.
yeah, exactly. And so introducing this entire approach is going to be done slowly and is done through the actions. It's going to be very like, okay, so you want to do these things. Okay, let's do these things. Let's look at this. What's happening? Where? Why? How? Who? Like, it's, I wouldn't even say I'm ignoring the language because it will come up in conversation, but it's almost the case of like, I have a different meaning to that word than they may do. and I'm going to use the meaning, I'm going to understand the meaning that they have with those words and use that as a constraint or an, what's an affordance? It's either, but
A constraint allows for affordances to
yeah.
perceive
So I'm going to
to
use that as a constraint to allow for the conversation to emerge. And then when they start asking questions around, the brain and the times I have those conversations that I go that deep into it is primarily with other coaches.
because they're the ones that are likely
Because
going to
yeah,
help those topics emerge.
and it's great because the other person, Claire, they are also a coach. And when we hopped on our call yesterday for the like sponsorship thing, we had our chat, and then I was like, right, so we've got half an hour left. Do you want me to go nerdy with you? Should we go deep into it? And they were like, yes, please. I'm like, okay, take a seat.
I'm I'm thinking about two things there. Firstly, is I'm going to go with this one because I feel like this is more of a statement rather than a continued point. That's how I've approached our conversations because I obviously read more than you do with the academic literature. And I could come in and say, I think these things, but I don't. I let the conversations emerge as they do. And then when you say something, as most people are probably familiar with, I say, I'm not so sure about that. I would rephrase it like this. Or what's your
And
meaning
it's
behind that?
interesting as I've been having these conversations, the shifts sometimes aren't as big as they originally felt when I first started discussing it. Like, no, 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 we can't talk like this. In fact, a specific section on my homepage around the "you aren't broken," I have changed my language completely after a conversation with someone because I obviously went pretty hard on the brain. I was like, the brain, no, 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 stop talking about your brain like that. No, 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 no. But then that didn't help because one, they were like, yeah, but I do genuinely have a problem. There is a connection or something happening in the brain, which is a medical condition. So that does get in my way. And also I have these like ADHD, the those as well. And I'm like, interesting, because that is a thing. Like you got Alzheimer's, the brain has a part to play, not all of, and so I actually changed the language of one of my sections to being we've zoomed in too far because that's what's happened. I'm
Mhm.
using the fractal kind of conversations we've had of like we've zoomed so far into this piece, and now I'm like, okay, let's zoom out. Let's just zoom out to everything.
Yep.
And when I mentioned that to them, they were like, yeah, that makes sense. It's like, how you're feeling and your whole body because your whole body experience. And I'm like, yes.
Embodied cognition.
Yes, you just said embodied cognition without realizing you said it. And then I got very excited and I'm like, exactly. And it was really interesting how meeting them where they are and then just hearing and then zooming back a tiny bit, like it was nowhere near as what was the word you used earlier? It was nowhere near as big and massive as I thought it would be. It was nowhere near as like, no, I'll find it again.
I was going to say I've
Um,
said lots of words.
you have, yeah. It's the paradigm that the paradigm shift is subtle. It's not, it is massive from a science, I suppose, research perspective. It is massive. But from a practitioner's perspective, I don't know. It is, but it depends on the factor you're looking at it from the measurement you're looking at it from.
So the reason I'm laughing is Julia and I came to the exact same conclusion, in that the paradigm shift will be huge for academics, for researchers, and will likely be huge for the practitioners that want to understand the philosophy behind their decision making. But everyday life, day-to-day people won't see a massive shift. They will probably, because the ecological approach is already there, what will probably happen is maybe some language will shift here and there when they're interacting with other people, but everyday behaviors are going to continue doing what happens because it's not a big thing like the sort of like the sun is now the center of the universe. That was a huge shift in the way that people behaved. But everyday behavior isn't going to shift with an ecological approach to explanations because some of the explanations from both approaches lead to the same behavior. It's the differences. So when an ecological approach would explain this solution being more effective, cognitive psychology would say this solution is more effective. It's those differences that we as ecological psychologists would want to focus on, and those that take an ecological approach would want to focus on. It's zooming out to a scale that is more for us appropriate to explain those experiences. And that brings me to my, I guess, second point, my second question. Yeah, with the with the discussion and the exploration with those other learners, with the other individuals, you mentioned you spoke with the other coach, was it Claire, for 30 minutes or whatever. If they are interested, where do you direct them? Because you can say go here first, but now you're instructing them to go to a certain place. You don't know what's most relevant for them. Because I would like to say, hey, go and explore something that you find is more relevant. But is that, oh, I'm going to go find a sports podcast, or I'm going to go read an academic journal about the constraints-led approach, or they're going to read a book about perception and action, or like how are you going to approach those? Because I imagine you're going to get people going, oh, I'm interested. How can I learn more?
I
Where do I go?
probably would point them here,
Okay.
either here or your. I don't know about your video because your video is
Yeah.
big, so that would
It's
terrify the
long
shit.
and complex.
Yeah, so I would probably, because we discuss it, like we embody the ecological approach through every single discussion, and I think that is the most efficient way to uncover it, because people will hear our conversations because they're open, because we question, because we have a safe space to discuss it. Will be able to, that they'll kind of like, oh, that's an interest. Oh, I didn't think about it. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I see where I see where Jonathan got that bit. Oh yeah, I see, like that we are embodying it. And so it's as I was kind of thinking about with my family as well, it was exposure of ideas, because that's how I learned it, through through you exposing the ideas to me. And then I was like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, 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 oh. And of course, as coached get, my wonderful idea would be coaches come to me. And then when coaches come to me, they get coached with the constraints-led approach and those other and the ecological approach underlying what I'm doing. And then they're like, how?
Yeah.
How? How? I'm like, hmm? And then it's like they will start, perhaps at first, mimicking and copying what I do with their clients. And then when it doesn't work, they will develop that. And then they'll come back and ask me more questions. And then I'll be like, yeah, cool. What about this? What about this? Oh, cool. That my dream would be like 3, 4 years down the line, I would be coaching coaches to use the ecological approach, because that would be amazing in the business. If more business coaches use the ecological approach, I would be so happy.
Taking an ecological approach is one of those things I believe that will be a paradigm shift. It will shift a lot of the way that people interact with other people. And I think the neurodiverse and all of the, I don't want to say modern because I don't think that's entirely accurate, but a lot of the more modern day movements are people embracing the differences that people have, whether it is neurodiversity or identities or the way that people categorize themselves, label themselves. A lot of politicians at the moment, obviously, you've got the general election in the UK, but they're saying, "Oh, we're such a separated society. There are so many groups," and you're like, "Yeah," because everyone is trying to zoom into their own little bit. That they want to feel safe in their own little bit because they don't feel safe in this big society because, well, you're not right. You don't fit in here. There's something wrong with you. So like, oh,
Mm.
okay, well, I'm going to go somewhere that's right for me then, which, as an ecological psychologist would suggest, well, the only right way for you is you, which means everyone is going to be a group of individuals, which isn't a society, because you're just constantly going to be arguing with one another. Whereas if instead of zooming in to categorizing each other in whatever category, label, diagnosis, barriers, lines, borders, Markov blankets, whatever you want to put there, instead of zooming in, we go, hold up a second, let's reverse the dial and zoom out. Why can't we just zoom out and accept that, yes, everyone is different because it's going to be relative to the organism environment relationship and the context that they are currently situated in within everyone else. Like, if we zoom out and recognize that, I feel like more people would be welcoming and communicate with others. But that's my maybe optimistic view of society and the world.
It was an interesting experience. I had a gaming night with a group of primarily queer members and Carl, who's been on the podcast. I think, is it once or twice? I don't know.
We've spoken about him a few times, but I think
We've
he's been
spoken
on it.
about it a
Well,
few
he's
times.
been on it at least once.
Yeah. Um, and it was really interesting to just have a conversation, the conversations we were having, and the jokes we had. And Carl was engaging in the jokes, but from a completely different perspective. And I was like, oh, this is beautiful. This is the ecological approach in action. And I'm just like, I just enjoyed zooming out and just watching and being a part of that.
I think if I was to give myself a superpower, like because some people do, that's what I feel like I'm effective at. When I was younger, didn't speak. I didn't feel the need to speak. I just observed. I watched. I tried to learn what I could, and that's what I do. Part of my hearing, like my hearing issue, like being half deaf, I miss things. So I have to be very observant of like lip reading was something that I do a lot. And other people notice that I lip read a lot as well. I was speaking to someone yesterday from trampoline, and she was saying that she was always wary of me being in the room and her saying something because she knew if she said something across the room and I was looking at her, she knew that I would know what she's saying because I could lip read. So it was something she was aware of, and it's something that I was aware of. Like I know that I can observe a room from a very set back view, which is why I think I've adopted the ecological approach so quickly, is that when I hear the explanations, I see the explanations in the environments. Whereas the cognitive psychology approach, I had to really try hard to apply the theories into experiences I was seeing.
Yeah, I think the same with me with my sight because I had to be so aware of my surroundings, which is ironic, really. You
Yes.
just assume that sight is the thing. Like I had to be so aware of my surroundings that I was always zoomed out just a little bit. And
Because
then
as
there was
soon as you
bits where
zoom in, you think you're going to miss something. I didn't hear something, or I
yeah,
didn't see something, or wait,
yes,
what was that? So you have to almost have like a third person view of yourself. Like, I'm in this conversation, but I'm
that
also
is
looking
my
at everything else.
experience of my life. It is a third person view, and I am often in the third person view because which is why I really liked the Gestalt approach because it does take that too. It takes a third person perspective as well because there's the chair exercise, the very famous chair exercise where you have yourself, the other self, and then that outside, like the observer on the outside. And that I loved as well because I was like, yeah, that's how I live. That is
Exactly. So
that
when it
is
comes
my
to,
experience.
I was going to say, so when it comes to the marketing of the ecological approach, for me, taking an ecological approach is zooming out with our explanation of experiences.
Yeah,
And like for me, labels are inaccurate. The labels we use are inaccurate. And when we zoom out, that becomes blatantly obvious. But not enough people, from my experience, zoom out when they're speaking.
yeah.
So when you're talking about things, or when I'm talking about things at least, I deliberately choose not to use labels. I try and use as few as possible. And when I do use them, I make sure I'm explicit about my personal meaning behind the word because meanings are in people, not words, which is why I asked about your marketing. It's like, hmm,
So I here's an interesting ecological, like a practical example of how ecological, like psychology and the ecological approach has changed my life. I am finally being contrarian.
it's changed your life. You're being sensationalist.
I know, I am. Believe me, I was accused of that this week. It was a really interesting engagement with someone around. So I basically expressed the meanings are in people, not words. And the reaction to it was, at least from my perception, a little bit visceral of like, no, there are facts. There are like the things in the
Definitions.
dictionary are definitions and they are fact. They are not open to interpretation. And I was like, oh, that's fascinating. Oh, please tell me more, because I cannot even start to grasp that concept, but I'm really curious. And so I asked, and the reaction was, we're just going around in circles. I'm like, yep, I know. Oh, I want to, I'm interested. are you interested in sharing your approach? Because I'm very interested in hearing it. But there was no.
So they just said that words have definitions, and that was essentially the end of it.
It was, and there's no point in us discussing it because you have a fundamentally different view. And I'm like, yeah, that's why I want to discuss it because I believe something different and I want to understand the way you believe what you believe because I'm interested. Because curiosity is one of my values. It is a pure and simple one of my values. I am just curious. I am interested in a different approach, in a different perspective, in a different view. I like to be told I'm wrong and then to hear why I'm wrong because it's interesting. Am I going to change my mind? Very unlikely, but that doesn't matter. But it may give me subtle shifts and help me to understand more of why I do what I do in the way that I do it. It's interesting to hear different approaches. And they're starting a podcast talking about it. I'm like, all right, I'll happily come on. And I was just thinking as well, I'm going to invite them here. It's going to be interesting though. I hope they would feel comfortable with that because there's two of us that believe the same thing versus the one person who does not. But you can take a contrarian view. So
I was going to say, I can sit on the cog psych view.
yeah.
Come on, John, eco psych me. Yeah, this is one of those things that I feel because I've had similar experiences. And when people have a view and you ask them for some sort of explanation of that view, I find that when people struggle to justify their own views, they become very defensive. And
Mm.
that for me is where the discourse becomes useless. Because as soon as
Yeah.
they become defensive and it becomes an emotional communication between you, like two people, I know I'm right, you're wrong, this is my belief, stop trying to attack me, sort of thing. That's where the conversation is, it's ended. That's where they have zoomed in so far that there's no, from my experience anyway, there's no benefit until you give them time to
Mm.
like zoom out, time to relax, because their embodied feeling of that communication
Yeah.
is so attuned to the dip that they've gone in that destabilization isn't going to get them out. It's just going to push them deeper.
Yeah. Yeah. And that kind of it was very interesting because their whole first initial kind of thing was talking about freedom of speech and being free to speak how you want to speak. And I'm like, I like this, but there was more there that I was like, I want to understand more.
This is one of my biggest frustrations with shallow thinking. And the way I'm going to describe shallow thinking is not going deep. And I feel like that's a good enough explanation because most people can feel when someone is going deep or not. A perfect example is a comment that I read this morning on when I did a video on mind maps, and they said trust the psychologist to overthink. So yeah, they recognized that I was thinking deeper than either they were or than they have seen other people do. There was an immediate comparison between my explanation of my experience and other people's explanations. So, overthinking, or the commonly used overthinking, for me is an explanation for someone that's thinking more deeply than someone else, to whoever they're comparing it to.
Yeah, to be part of that. Thank you for that. I'm going to put that because often when I speak to people, they think they're overthinking, and I'm like, no, 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 no. Keep going because you're getting deeper, because you're gaining more understanding of how, no, don't stop. Go,
Yeah.
go. Get your overthinking on. There's something there. Let's go find it because there's something there that you need to explore. Otherwise, you wouldn't be thinking about it.
The thing that I used to say to I can't remember the person's name, but they were in my chat when we were streaming like a couple of years back, and they used to say, oh, I'm overthinking all the time, and I would respond and say, yeah, okay, so what's underthinking look like? What does underthinking look like? Because you can't not think, so there must be a line that you've drawn. So okay, now this is overthinking. So what is underthinking? And they couldn't come up with an explanation of what underthinking is. There's just not overthinking. You're like, you've got to draw a line. And this is where those binary approaches of over and under, or better or worse, you need a comparison, you need a scale of measurement, rather than, well, this is deeper, this is more shallow. And the shallow thinkers, from my experience, will agree with a comment, they'll agree with a statement, they'll agree with a mission or a goal, but they won't have thought any deeper than that sentence, that claim, that target. I want the country to be more green. I want free speech. I want XYZ, whatever. But then they don't think deeply about how that's going to work, what they may need to do to make that work, what behaviors they may need to shift, what assumptions they are making in order for that to be true to them. Oh, you have a brain-based problem. Oh, okay. You are now assuming that you are predominantly using your brain to do these things. Does that mean you're assuming working memory?
Are you
Well,
assuming my cognition?
exactly. Are you assuming I believe in working memory? Well, you've made this comment that your brain doesn't have enough RAM. The way that we theorize RAM at the moment is working memory.
There was something that emerged from my conversations was like, oh, so we have this discourse around AI, and AI is going to take over our jobs and take over the world. And I think we've explored this before, but it really came to fruition as I was working through this. I was like, oh, that's why people are scared because I see AI, I think the same as you, as a tool. It's a
Niche
thing.
construction.
Yeah, it is a niche construction that is there, and I can use it to do a certain thing, to do things that I really just don't care about, but do need to get done. That is non-critical because I will always look at it from, and I will always review it, etc., etc. But there's a lot of people who are terrified. And my hypothesis on this is because
You
of,
scientist.
I know, right? Is because of the traditional cognitive approach. Because it assumes we have, because the language that we're using, what has become the language is RAM, memory. We are computers. We operate as a computer. I don't have enough storage. And so that right there, when you look at it from that kind of factor, that measurement, that is terrifying because we're fucked. Because
Yep.
computers are just going, it can think faster than us. It can do things faster than us.
That's
And
the
so you're then stuck in this thing of like trying to chase a technology that's just going to be faster than you because it can cognize faster than you, but it's not cognition.
That's the thing. Like we use the computer metaphor as a way to explain the way that we work, but we don't work like a computer. We're not a computer. So when a better computer comes around, this isn't just AI. Every time some sort of technological advancement has come along, the human race has decided this is the end of humans, or this is the problem. This is going to destroy this, that, and the other. Well, if you're explaining humans as machines, then yes, but humans aren't
Mm,
machines.
mm.
And I thought we'd learnt this lesson years
And then
ago.
when I say that to people, they're like, well, yeah, well, of course not. I'm like, okay.
So what are you worried about?
So, and it's like, yeah, of course we're not machines. Of course we don't think. Yeah, but the language you're using is making you be like the language you are using, the meaning behind. Okay, so what do you mean by RAM? What do you mean by you don't have enough capacity or brain or this? So what do you mean by those words?
Processing. I need
Yeah,
time to
what are you?
process.
What is the process? What are you processing? Like, what is that? I don't. It's like exactly. That's the questions I have because once we move away, because the moment, and I put this on the site as marketing because it's a good point because it's very hot topic and etc. etc. It's like when we move away, if when we move away from processing like an AI, it's like we are ahead because we will always be ahead of AI due to not being a computer.
We are organism.
We are an organism, not a computer.
We're not niche construction. So for those unfamiliar with niche construction, it's essentially from ecological psychology, of course, it's essentially something that organisms do in their environmental niche. They construct things in their environmental niche to make behaviors, lives easier. So the easiest one that I like to use is a beaver and a dam. Like the dam is niche construction. They build dams to help with their lives. Very, very, very abbreviated version of that. So the way I imagine AI is a wood. It's a bit of wood to build a dam. That's what it is. AI is a big plank of wood that I'm throwing on the floor to block water. That's what it is. I want to stop water from going over there. I'm gonna plonk my AI bit of wood over there, and now we're good. We're done. That's how I see AI. I don't see AI as a beaver. The plank of wood can't chop down a tree and then put other bits of wood into a dam. No, wood doesn't do that.
No. There is such limited, it has very limited capacity because it has a capacity.
Yeah.
We do not have a capacity.
Unless you believe we live in the Matrix, in which case we are controlled by computers.
Yes, true, but I don't. So there we are.
No, me either. Me either. I don't think we need a loan of intelligence. I don't think we need a computer to program all of us. No, I think we do
It would be a
have.
very complicated program.
Yes. I guess it depends how you define complexity, you know?
True. True.
But no, I don't believe in the Matrix, and I don't think that. I mean, it was a great set of films. The most recent one, not so sure.
I haven't watched it.
Yeah, not
I didn't watch the recent one.
it wasn't bad. It wasn't good. It was like out of 10. It was like a solid 5. Right.
Yeah, that is most films these days, isn't it, really?
See, my family and I don't tend to watch films that are highly rated. We
I mean,
actually
neither do I. I don't really watch films, to be fair. Not
uh,
really.
no, we tend to watch films at like 4 or 3 stars because we find that the 5-star films most of the time are either the action films that, unless you're like a 6-year-old that just wants loads of guns and cars and machines and explosions, whatever, great. There's no story to this. It's just good guy sees bad guy, or good girl sees bad girl, and fight, 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 fight for an hour and a half, and then good person wins. Great, thanks, really exciting. uh,
Thank you, Hero's Journey. Is that it?
yeah, exactly. Whereas the 3 and 4 stars, from my experience, they are normally not 5 stars because there is a story that you need to follow, and you have to think to watch the film. Those are the ones I'm more interested in. And when
Same.
I think back to all of the films that I've enjoyed, it's the ones that have made me, that has challenged my philosophy, that's questioned something, like Inception, like The Matrix, those sorts of things, or even the ones that are well out there. I mean, going back in time, you've got Alien and Predator, those ones. They are challenging the way that we view the world. And a lot of them, when you really step back, a lot of them, when you look at it, they challenge the way that we explain our experiences through cognitive psychology. They challenge that, oh no, brain isn't stored in here. We have, like, Alphas is a series we're watching on TV again. Alphas is where humans have developed super abilities, like superpower abilities. And what they do is they emphasize something that humans have. So one of the girls, as part of the team, has super senses. So she can hear really well, she can smell really well, she can see really well, like microorganisms, etc. But she's she's perceiving drastically differently to others. And when you zoom out and you step back and go, okay, so what are these alphas doing? These alphas have emphasized senses, but some of the senses are their ability to rub their hands together to create fire. Like, obviously, that's fiction, but that friction that they're creating is going to be different for each person. So when you step back, maybe this is overthinking, or it's me thinking deeply about the films or series in this case. That questioning of, oh, they have a different perception, they have a different feeling, they have a different sense, they are experiencing the world differently. So yes, it's, oh look, I'm making fire with my hands and I can control electricity by holding on wires. Okay, that's a bit stretching a bit too far for reality. But their experiences of the world is, oh, we are alphas, we are different from them over there, those people over there. And it comes back to the labeling, to the categorization, to the zooming in of, you are an alpha that can do this thing. You have an ability that no one else has. Well, yeah, everyone does. Action capabilities, that's what we call them in ecological psychology. And I'm like, these series, these films, these things that get a lot of people interested take an ecological approach. They look at an assumption from cognitive psychology, challenge it, expand it, then discuss the experiences of those humans. That's the
But
ecological
that's just
approach.
creativity. Well, when I sent a few emails, it's just my intuition. I'm like, yeah, I know. And guess what? Your intuition is explained psychologically, ecologically. Can we please talk about it more?
Question for you.
Mm.
I said to Jeff, and this emerged through the conversation, that I believe the "it depends" answer can be explained through ecological psychology, whereas cognitive psychology relies on "it depends." What are your initial reactions?
So are you referencing like the it depends answer, where you can actually answer the question with ecological psychology, or are you meaning the use of the word it depends?
Both. So where people say, "Oh, it depends," you'll get to some sort of depth at a conversation, and then whoever will say, "Oh, yeah, but it just depends," and then they start listing out all the potential things that it could depend on.
Mm.
For me, I feel the ecological approach can explain the "it depends" situations. You're doing what Jeff did.
Yeah, because there are multiple. I think you're what I'm getting is that you're actually asking two questions
Mhm.
in one sentence. So I'm trying to look at both questions at the same time, which is interesting. Yeah,
I'm waving my hand. I'm like, yes, yes, and I can't mind read.
I I don't know is the simple answer, well, but I'm going for it now, and I'm just
Mhm.
like, interesting,
Why don't you know?
because I've never thought of it. I've never explored it. So I'm just like, okay, so how would you
This
explain
is the
the
fourth time I've said something, and the person has gone, yeah, I don't know. I haven't thought about it like that.
Yeah, it's cool. I like it. I'm usually the one saying that, so it's great. It's like, yes, yay! Someone stop me!
It's like I like this experience, but it's also really
Yeah,
annoying because
yeah.
I want to speak with people that have thought about it like this. And I mean, I spoke with Julia, I spoke with Jeff, I've spoken with you, and I've spoken with a couple of other academics as well, and they're like, yeah, I haven't thought about it like that. I'm like, why not? So yeah.
Constraints because I can only think about so many
Yeah,
things.
academics are like, I gotta write this paper.
Yeah, I'm stumped.
So I'll mention what Jeff sort of went. Jeff sort of explored it, but was also a little bit stumped. So he was saying that he doesn't think that the ecological approach can explain the it depends scenarios. But he was saying that if I'm meaning that the ecological approach has a better way to explain the bits involved in that, the bits of the it
Mm.
depends, like the weather and how you're feeling, how someone else is feeling,
Yeah,
then he was saying that, oh yeah, I guess you could probably say that that's something to do with the way that we perceive.
yeah.
And that therefore brings in invariance. And he was
Mm.
saying, and they sort of like led to this critical point where he was saying, well, if your argument is that it depends in the
Mm.
ecological approach is looking at invariance and how perceiving invariance constrains the perception anyway,
Yeah.
then yes.
Yeah, because that's like exploring invariance is what when I'm saying it depends, it's like there are lots of options here. Do you wish to, it's almost inviting the exploration when I use it depends. It's like, do you wish to get like there are multiple options here. I wonder whether like one thing I might try to do is move away from the it depends because it's a conversation closer. It often it's an end versus exploring it from a okay, there are lots of options. Where would you like to begin? It's almost moving away from the it depends to a let's explore.
Exactly.
I had this experience yesterday when I was helping a client with setting up their course, their program that they're making, where they approach or are trying to approach marketing dynamically. But obviously, the constraints of the platform are difficult to move around when it comes to making it easy to approach or making it simple for people to get started, because that's often the hard part of just getting started, especially in marketing. And also there is a constraint to the platform, but and trying to figure out how to use those constraints in a way that helps with behaviors. It was like, okay, here's a few options. Okay, it depends. Oh, have we looked at this? Have we looked at that? I was like, oh yeah, I don't like that. I'm like, cool. Yes.
That's how, if anyone's looked at the comments that I've put on any social media platform, most of the time when I say it depends, I then follow up with lots of variables that it may depend on. I don't leave it with it depends. I give them a list of potential opportunities for them to explore. And it's very similar to the way that I interact with people, is that I limit the way that I use it depends, and when I do use it, it very rarely is the end of a sentence because I will then list out all of the other things worth exploring, which with the ecological approach makes things very easy, because you can then look at the relationship between the organism and environment and look at the various factors that you could then explore. Navigating those things is the same as navigating the constraints, because the list of it depends is the variable constraints. They can be individual constraints, task constraints, or
Yeah.
environmental constraints. And that is exactly what we're looking to explore from an ecological perspective. Whereas cognitive psychology, they have assumptions, and those assumptions lead to unsolvable problems, which is where it depends ends.
Yeah.
And that for me is where I would like that's the meaning behind the ecological explanation of the answer. It depends in science.
Yeah.
That's my logic.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously, going back to it depends on the cognitive approach, that means there's an answer because the cognitive approach, there always seems to be one answer. There always is an answer.
Put
And
all
it's a
these
waste of
dominoes up and
time.
you'll get this one.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to just choose one. And that was something that I was really sensitive on with the sales page because obviously when I'm selling stuff, there is a conflict. I want people to buy. So it needs to feel like the answer. And I had to figure out whether it was the answer or an answer. And so I have gone at the moment with an answer. It's your answer. And I've used your an awful lot. It's like your next step. Because as I was going through the sales page, we were talking about to one of the exercises I do with clients is the now or next, adding a huge constraint because they have lots of projects that they're going on, and everyone just says, do less, just do less. I was like, no, you don't have to do less. Let's just look at what you've got and then figure out where to go next. It is just a nice constraint where you just go now, what are you going to do now? What are you going to do next? And as I was discussing this with a client, they turned around and said, just to note, it sounds like when you say next, what's now and what's next, sounds like there's an answer. And I'm like, interesting. Interesting. Okay, cool. What are you going to do now? What are you going to do next? Because
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have that interpretation. I was like, I had those other bits. And it was interesting to go, oh yeah, okay, cool. Let's tweak that then. Let's tweak that language so that it is what is your next? What is your now? What do you want to do now? What do you want to do next?
I do
Which
that in my coaching all the time.
yeah,
It's all about the individual, person-centered, player-centered, participant-centered, whatever you want to call it. Academia use all the words because they can't be consistent. But yeah, it's focusing on the person.
yeah, yeah. And so that's kind of where it's so is that the curse of knowledge assumption of like I have all these things that I fundamentally believe that I just don't state.
Yep.
And it's interesting. It's like being more deliberate with my language to state the things I always thought.
Anything else you want to add?
No?
All right. Bye, everyone. See you all next week.